makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Welcome to the next war update on the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm going to be discussing the events of the last 24 hours, which didn't really change much of the strategic situation. By some accounts, it was a very bad day for the Russians in terms of equipment lost, possibly casualties, well, most likely human casualties as well. And yeah, what is clear is that we are kind of ending the first phase of the war with a transition into a second phase, which I'm going to describe. I did describe what this phase is a bit in the last video, but I'll do it again. Anyway, if you saw yesterday's map, it hasn't changed much. There was yet another assault on Kyiv, and it failed. Exactly the same as the first one. And this was also coupled with an attack on Kharkiv, the Ukraine's second largest city, which is over here in this side of the front. Again, it was defeated. So why were they defeated? Well, for the same reasons that the very first assault on Kyiv failed, and that is the Russians so far have been using primarily special forces and airborne troops, which are also elite, to enter the city, very quickly through various different axes. But unfortunately, once they're in the city, they can be easily beaten back because they don't have heavy equipment. These are mostly like standard infantry mobility vehicles. They're not using tanks. They might have a few APCs or slightly smaller armored vehicles, but they don't have any heavy equipment in them. So they've been ambushed pretty easily. Infantry in these kind of very high mobile vehicles can enter a city very quickly, but it's harder for them to actually occupy territory in that city and hold on. So I don't know. I'm not a tactician, so I don't know exactly what the Ukrainians are doing. But it seems to me that they're relying basically on like also very mobile infantry teams with lots of anti-tank weapons, things like that, rockets as well, and just finding out kind of letting them come in, see where they're going. The more inside of the city that they are, the more easily they'll be confused about the tactical situation, and then they get destroyed. So not not good so far, especially considering that these are effectively Russia's most well-trained troops. And I said in the previous video, once they start moving the tanks, once they start moving the heavy equipment, those troops are very much less well-trained than the ones that are being used now for these kind of operations. And tanks and other mechanized vehicles will be sitting ducks in a city if there are sufficient Ukrainian troops that are still well armed. So that is not good for the Russians in terms of their prospects for urban combat. Now, uh, that's not to say that the war is going, entirely badly for the Russians. They have scored a number of, I would say, strategic successes in the south. And I've mentioned this numerous parts that the south is where they've made their biggest advances. There is some evidence that they've managed to cross I don't know why it's not showing here, but I'm going to show another map in a bit where they have crossed the Dnieper and have been moving towards Mykolaiv, which I guess the eventual target is Odessa. But again, these are small kind of vanguard troops, same strategy. It does not, just because they've entered a city does not mean that they are going to be able to hold that city. And the best example of this is the fact that the Ukrainians retook Kherson. So now the other side, the right side, is worrying because they're moving into towards Mariupol, and there have been signs of artillery attacks on Mariupol, so they are quite close. And they've also kind of the right wing prong, well, rightmost prong, is going both to Mariupol and also north in this direction, so kind of hugging the east bank of the river. Again, this is very difficult to defend territory for Ukraine, very flat, not many natural obstacles, also not very populated, so also, no big urban spaces where they can hold on. I suspect now, if they're making a tactical retreat, at some point you kind of have to make a stand. And I genuinely wonder what the plan here is. The risk, of course, is that the troops that are holding here, this side of the front at Mariupol, could be encircled. That is the main threat. So the alternative for the Ukrainians is to fall back, um, and lose a significant amount of ground. And this could have implications, not so much from a military perspective. If Ukraine decides to abandon this part and sort of move back towards more defensible positions here, this is not like they lost the war by any stretch of the imagination, but it's sort of worrying because if there is a ceasefire, if there are some negotiations, and they are going to start, they have agreed that negotiations will be held near the border of Belarus. Uh, I don't know when, maybe as early as tomorrow. Um, Russia would have a pretty strong hand here in claiming that they kind of occupy this territory. And I said it from the beginning that one of their objectives would be, I suspect, the reason that he's going all out on this war is probably to annex a land bridge towards Crimea. So that would give the Russians, even despite militarily, no hope of knocking out Ukraine anytime soon, this would put them in a more advantageous situation in the negotiating table. As for everything else, again, these advances, these are all sort of these fast-moving vanguard troops. They can be beaten back. There's been seesaw battles in various cities. Here's another map that I'm going to show you. So that's also kind of the state of play here. And it looks like the Russians have, well, exclude the Donetsk and Luhansk because these are the separatist territories. It looks like the advance. It looks more impressive than this one, but still, compared to what their objectives were for the first couple of days, this is really, really, it's not a victory by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, that is kind of the situation right now, on the ground. So now we're gonna turn to some Twitter readings, which are always enlightening. So first one is from Stanimir Dobrev. I saw this thread and I thought it was really good. So try and explain the irrational Russian armed forces behavior towards strategy. Here's where I will start. Russian armed forces have never attempted anything like this. Well, yeah, at least since World War II. To subdue another enemy mechanized army, yeah, they haven't done that since World War II. This isn't about what kind of war they're fighting, it's about what they're capable of mustering. Secondly, it seems the decision-making structures have low opinion in general of Ukraine and their fighting abilities, and sort of an ideal that there's a willing subservience in Ukrainians if they get to be a part of Russia. Pure racism informing their decision-making process. Yeah. Thirdly, battalion tactical groups are terrible units to support operations. They have overload, the commander lack of support, and might not properly integrate with air or do adequate scouting as signals and recon are missing, along with liaisons with them. This is very true. I'm also a bit surprised that they've made most of their tactical maneuvering on a battalion level. So the smaller the unit, the less support you have for it. That's kind of logical. In Western armies, the main maneuver unit is a brigade. So that is a unit that is one up higher than a battalion. So usually there's about four battalions per brigade, or a regiment. Regiment and brigade are often used interchangeably, kind of represent the same size of units. So yeah, in Western military doctrine, the brigade is the primary maneuver unit. And brigades, because they're bigger, well, they also have more support elements to them. So it's easier for them to coordinate logistics, things like that. So if on the battlefield you have, as is the case now, with Russia, say 3 battalions, battalion tactical groups engaging, they will not have the same levels of support as a brigade with 3 battalions in that brigade fighting as a unit. So that is the thing. And yeah, to say nothing of, even going up, which would be a division, which most Western countries no longer really rely on the division as sort of the main combat unit. That was mostly until the end of the Cold War, even up to the Gulf War. But right now, as it is, it's the brigade. So I also was a bit kind of like, oh, are they really gonna try and do? Are their battalion tactical groups really that efficient and that well organized to operate independently? And no, I definitely don't think that you can pull this off at a battalion level. Uh, so, yeah. Fourthly, without standing down, even if parts of the UA National Guard, Police, Border Guard, Territorials, and Army are defeated, UA regional commands can be autonomous for days and are vast structures. Short of ordering their demobilization, their removal is way too costly for the Russian Ministry of Defense. There is a lot of hidden corruption and misreporting that gets baked into calculations. The higher you go up the chain in a corporation, as in a corporation, the more dismissive management that is, that it will be an issue. Uh, Putin doesn't even remotely grasp how bad it is. So that's also the problem of having an autocrat as a leader, uh, and that is that the people, his subordinates, are going to tell Putin what he wants to hear. They're terrified of telling him, that the Russian army is in fact not as well trained as it looks on paper. So I think Putin was basically betting on an overwhelming victory based on information that he was lied to by his own subordinates. That's the problem with dictatorships. That's why dictatorships are often not good at war fighting than democracies, because if their military is terrified of their leader, as they were, for example, the Germans with Hitler, they will make terrible strategic decisions, not just strategic ones, but grand strategic ones, big picture stuff. And that is what basically brought down the German army, which they could have won World War II if they did not have a megalomaniac like Hitler, who was also obsessed with micromanaging the war. So, yeah, that is a mistake. And same thing happened with the USSR at the beginning of the war. Uh, the state of the Red Army at the time when the Germans invaded was absolutely deplorable, and I'm not sure if Stalin really was aware of all that. And the smartest thing that Stalin did during World War II was to not get involved in the military process. He, despite being just as ruthless a totalitarian dictator as Hitler was in terms of his control, maybe even more so than Hitler in terms of his total control over the body politic in Russia, well, the Soviet Union. He delegated the conduct of the war to his generals and marshals. And I definitely think that that was a big reason why the Soviet armed forces ended up beating Nazi Germany, despite what happened in that first year. So, yeah, um, we saw. Okay, so based on those five, let me explain the situation now. Russian units aren't stopping fire, limiting use of their calibers or standoff strikes. This is all they could muster. South, calibers are limited by launch tubes. A bit over 100 is what they had ready. We saw constant trains and movements over time, moving Russian equipment, the loss of aircraft being moved over to mustering points, and at the end, people. When the supply was at its limit, just kept them warm and fed. They found out the hard way this was their logistical limit. Um, yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but you can read this but for yourself. Uh, yeah, so this is the interesting bit. The limited supply meant that it had to be a mad dash. Battalion tactical groups were split into smaller subunits, traveling on multiple roads to avoid congestion. When they met something, they'd want to coalesce or get into a fight. If the Ukrainian army was surprised, it would work. Were the Russian troops quality ones, they do better with just surprise on their side, but they were mostly poorly trained as full units were never called up before. Usually a brigade would only send a company and could handpick. Now it's either confess the lies about readiness or be creative, because the corruption had created such a rot. Brigade commands chose creative. Criminal conscripts were added to the buildup. Ghost soldiers on the roster were hidden. This means battalion tactical groups were far greener. When these hit a city or made contact, they deploy in unideal formations of platoon to company size. Not their fault all that much. This is what they knew. Then, if a Ukrainian army unit knew in advance where they were and was careful, it would annihilate the battalion tactical group splinter formation. Because the timetable had to be kept, supplies were already short. With the delay, Russian troops would go a step further. They'd keep one subunit to block and redirect subsequent units. Rest would continue on parallel roads. Again, timetable meant usually more major roads. After a couple of roadblocks, battalion tactical groups would be diluted, lost a bunch of units, and fighting to a standstill. You'd expect that there would be air or artillery support, but battalion tactical groups aren't suited for that. When they move in chunks in parallel, the artillery spotters could be in another group. Yeah, so that's kind of the issues. As well, their failure to obtain air superiority is also very worrying. The fact that they were not able, despite having such a massive advantage in terms of air force, to not be able to destroy Ukraine's air defense system. That is usually the very first thing that gets destroyed when, for example, a NATO army engages in combat. The air defense, that's the first to go. Day one. Not just day one, hour one. So yeah, so I just want to read sort of the summary of the Institute for the Study of War, which has daily updates as well, which I recommend people reading. The Russian military has likely recognized that its initial expectations that limited Russian attacks would cause a collapse of Ukrainian resistance have failed and is recalibrating accordingly. The Russian military is moving additional combat resources towards Ukraine and establishing more reliable and effective logistics arrangements to support what is likely a larger, harder, and more protracted conflict than it had originally prepared for. The tide of war could change rapidly in Russia's favor if the Russian military has correctly identified its failings and addresses them promptly, given the overwhelming advantage in net combat power Moscow enjoys. Ukrainian morale and combat effectiveness remain extremely high, however, and Russian forces confront the challenge of likely intense urban warfare in the coming days. So, yeah, I broadly agree with this. They will probably be bringing in more firepower, but as I've insisted, it might be of lower quality, even lower morale, and if they decide to do urban fighting, I don't know. The other thing is we don't really know the state of Ukrainian casualties. I would be very curious to know exactly what they have lost, or a close approximation. Any source that they're not revealing their casualties for obvious reasons. And the only source that we have for those casualties are Russia, which is they're just completely not believable. I mean, they basically claim any military operation that they do has zero casualties. So nothing that comes out of Russia can be possibly believed. And I've said it numerous times, the stuff that's coming out of Ukraine is probably inflated, but I definitely think they are much closer to reality. And more importantly, they match what you see on videos. So you see, Ukrainian units being destroyed as well, but overwhelmingly the number of the videos that you see are of Russian columns, Russian vehicles being destroyed. So I do think that they are losing men and material at a much faster pace than the Ukrainians. Now, what also benefits Ukraine is that they are being resupplied by NATO. They are getting tons of stocks of anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft missiles, and that is very good news. I heard a report that they're also going to give Ukraine fighter jets, which would be insane. Like that is crazy. Yeah, there's foreign volunteers that are now going in. I read a story about a unit of 10 former US and British special forces that are basically flying out to Poland, and they're going to cross the border. So Ukraine is, even if Russia, I'm a bit more optimistic than this in terms of the capacity of Russia to apply even more overwhelming force and still kind of achieve some kind of breakthrough. I don't know. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. I could be biased, of course. In situations like this, your own personal biases play into account. I will not deny that I have a very, very, very 100% pro-Ukrainian bias. The only Ukrainian unit I hope gets defeated is the Azov battalion. I don't give a fuck about them. I hope they fight the treacherous Chechens that are now fighting for Russia. That would be amazing if the Azov battalion and the Chechens go to it and they all die. That would be great. That's the only unit that I would be happy if Russia destroys. But for the rest, I'm 100% pro-Ukraine. So I could be biased. The best way to fight bias is to recognize that you're biased. But these sites that I'm following, I think are giving a pretty reliable picture of what's going on, and it remains to be seen what happens. Oh, the drone strikes are also Ukraine has a number of TB2. These are Turkish unmanned aerial vehicles, and they have boom. Yeah, if they're getting more of them, they can. The drones can definitely offset some of the air inferiority that Ukraine has. And remember, it's not full air superiority that Russia has. They are still being harassed by the Ukrainian Air Force, and they have not been able to destroy the air defense systems. And even if they manage to subdue to some extent the main air defense units, the fact that Ukraine is getting tons of uh, anti-air, like portable anti-air missiles, like Stingers, things like that, those will not be able to take out sort of the high-flying fighters or any heavier bombers that Russia would be using, but they will be able to take down helicopters. They will be able to take down ground attack aircraft as well. So they're not those are not friendly skies for Russian aircraft. That's kind of what I meant to say. Um, yeah, I think this is from. I think this video might be from. There was a very good video of like the
Пидорасы
aftermath.
ебаные, блядь.
There was a good video of the aftermath of the Kharkiv fighting, but yeah, the Russians got stomped. Yesterday, when I went to sleep, I was a bit worried of what was going to go on in Kharkov because you saw the reports of the troops moving in. I had no idea how well defended Kharkiv was. There were some reports that the front had been breached after the rocket strikes. I found it a bit hard to believe, but I guess I've been right so far. I've been right so far. My record on accuracy in reporting this conflict has been close to 100%. So I hope to keep it that way. Oh, that's a T-90 tank. I hadn't seen a picture of a T-90 tank recently, or at least involved in the conflict. Almost all the ones that you've seen have been T-72s. Those are 1970s era Russian tanks that have been heavily upgraded. And they've used a few T-80s as well, that was the last tank that they developed before the end of the Cold War. And the T-90 was developed after the Cold War, so it's it's no longer their most modern one, but it's definitely more modern than the T-72s and 80s. And I finally saw a picture of one. And unsurprised, destroyed. Yeah. So yeah, same map, kind of showing that. Wow. That is insane. The amount of material losses that Russia is sustaining is crazy, crazy. And they can't. I mean, they have to replace them with their own stocks. They have no real military industrial complex anymore to build them in a quick fashion. Really, the only countries that could probably build equipment really, really quickly is the U.S. and China. Right now, Russia doesn't have the capacity anymore. That's why they've struggled so much to bring in new equipment in big numbers, because they just can't build it. You see all these shiny weapons in arms fairs, things like that, but you read about only 20 being in service, 10 more 1 year. I mean, that's really nothing. That's why they don't have big units that have all this new equipment. And that's why also there's stocks of things like cruise missiles, Iskander ballistic missiles, things like that. They're likely going to run out. So they can't maintain a war of this intensity for much longer. And if they start deploying the heavier units, they are capable of deploying more firepower. So that is true. I've said that numerous times. So this bit here, in terms of a larger, harder, and more protracted conflict because of more firepower that Russia can bring in, this is absolutely true. But it's also the quality of that firepower that counts. So I'm a bit more, slightly more optimistic. I mean, this is still a war that Ukraine can lose. Let's not kid ourselves. If they fuck up in any one of the major fronts, yeah, they can. This is basically one of those wars where you make one big strategic mistake and you're gone. That's the story of every smaller army fighting a bigger one. But really, nothing suggests to me that this is close to happening. Nothing, absolutely. And certainly at a tactical level, the Ukrainian army has clearly been more than a match with Russia on every single front. And even if you discount this sort of bigger advance that you see here at the south, again, this is largely a result of territory that favors the attacker over the defender, and the likelihood that Ukraine is trading space. So we'll see. So what to look out for in the next 24 hours? Mariupol, I would say the developments here are interesting. This is probably right now the higher risk front for Ukraine. There will be more fighting. You will probably see parts of the city taken. You will probably see sort of similar type operations as with Kyiv and Kharkiv. So don't be surprised if you see videos of Russian troops in Mariupol. Again, that does not mean that they've taken the city in any way. And yeah, maybe there'll be another assault on Kiev. I'm not sure. I don't think they believe in third time as a charm. They might pause with Kiev for a while and maybe try another attempt at Kharkiv. I don't know. I would suspect that they might just try 2 attempts for each city, and if they fail, then change the plans. See what else they can do, and see if they bring in the heavier equipment that they have here. There's probably about 30,000 troops, maybe more by now, 40,000 troops. Yeah, that's the story. But as it is, Russia is not winning this war as of now. So hopefully the NATO reinforcements of material will keep them fighting. And yeah. Now the only other worrying development is the fact that Putin has put his nuclear deterrence forces on alert. That is a move again that I think, well, he's batshit crazy enough that and I said it. If it looks like the war is slipping out of his hands, the idea that he could use a tactical nuke or 2 is not out of the question. Not out of the question. As for the extent of the nuclear missiles that he's willing to use, I don't know. He's crazy enough, but he should know that it would result in the obliteration of Russia. So the other thing, one last point worth watching today, well, today, part of the world's time, is the economy. I think that might end up being the big story because there might not be that much fighting compared to the previous days, not much change in the strategic situation in the next 24 hours. The economic front is going to be really big. Central bank has been punished. I've read that the ruble has lost something like 20% of its value now that it started trading. This is gonna be rough. This is gonna be rough. Russia has tons of international reserve, dollar reserves, but if they're gonna support a plunging currency, those are gonna be wasted very, very quickly with no guarantee that it's gonna sustain it for longer. So yeah, economic front. Watch the economic front first, and watch the negotiations second, and watch the Mariupol front. That one is, I think, from a military perspective, the important one right now. See what happens around Mariupol and the South in general. Yeah, on that note, glad everyone who's following these videos. I hope you're enjoying them. I hope they're useful. I hope you're learning something. I hope I'm, understanding military strategy and tactics is not easy if you're just watching the news. You're not familiar with these things. So I hope this is useful. And I'm thinking of making another video about kind of discussing the weapons that they're using, things like that. So maybe I'll do it tomorrow, along with, or rather separate to the daily update. So yeah, have a good day, people, and I'll see you tomorrow. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and yeah, thank you.